Hello quilters, and welcome to week 3 of the summer camp sew along hosted by Pat Sloan at ilovetomakequilts.com. This week we're talking about hikes, and I have vivid memories of lots of bushwalks as I had the luxury of living close to lots of national parks in rural New South Wales here in Australia. So why don't you jump over to Pat's website, ilovetomakequilts.com, grab your pattern, come back here, and I'll show you how it's done. Before we get started, why don't you click the like button, share the video, subscribe for future content, and tickle the bell to be notified. This week we have a block consisting of 2 snowball blocks and 2 4 patches. So we begin with 2 large light squares, 4 medium squares, and 8 dark squares. For now, we're going to take 4 of the dark squares, match these with the 2 large light squares, and set those aside for now. With the remaining 4 medium squares and 4 dark squares, pair these up, and these will become our 4 patches. Now take the other 4 dark squares that we set aside earlier, and these will become sew-and flips on the large light square. Take your marking tool of choice, draw a line from corner to corner diagonally, and you can do this on all 4, or today I'm only doing 1, as I'm going to show you an alternate method of creating sew-and flip corners. Grab your light square now and line up the square that you've drawn the line on in the corner, matching all your edges. Pin and get ready to take this over to the machine. Today I will be showing you the traditional sew and flip method, but I am also going to show you how I do it with the folded corner clipper tool. There will be a link in the description below for you to purchase this tool and support Pat's small business. Take the remaining large light square, line the dark square up the same way as if you had the drawn line, and grab your folded corner clipper tool. With this tool, simply line up on the lines that represent the size of the small dark square, in this case 3.5 inches, ensuring all the edges match, and trim. Scary, I know. Here I like to use a couple of pins just to secure the pieces so that they don't shift when moving over to the sewing machine, which is where we're going to head next. So at the sewing machine, I'm first going to show you the traditional method for sew and flip. This is where you sew just 1 thread to the other side of your drawn line. Next, we're going to take the one that we created with the folded corner clipper tool, and I like to use a scant 1/4 inch here, so the same idea as just 1 thread width away, just to ensure that the block remains square with this method. I also like to take the pieces that I chopped off and create bonus blocks. Here you see all 3 blocks as I've taken them off the sewing machine, and we're just going to clip those apart and set the small half square triangle aside. Now I'm just going to finger press my folded corner clipper piece. It's not exactly square, but I can fudge that in the seam allowance. We're now going to check that our traditional method all matches up before we take our ruler and cut off, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm now going to rotate the block and repeat on the opposite side, and I am going to finish these using the folded corner clipper and do the same on the other remaining piece. Back at the sewing machine, I'm just going to attach those last two sew-on flips before moving on to the 4 patch. For the 4 patch units to begin, take the squares we set aside that were matched earlier and simply sew a 1/4 inch seam down one side of all 4. Then meet me at the pressing station. As per previous weeks over at the pressing station, I like to finger press first and then press using the iron. Again, this is a pressing action. Sit the iron down, leave it for 5 seconds and lift. Now to continue with the 4 patches, press these all to the dark side. Take your 4 patch units and you'll be able to nest the seams in the middle, placing opposite colours against each other. Nest and pin. As you can see here, I'm doing a bit of a different pinning technique where I go under the first 2 layers, pin through the bottom 2 and then through all 4. Here I am showing you that again in slow motion. Press into the nesting, down through the bottom 2 layers and through all 4. This helps reduce bulk at the sewing machine, which we're going to now. Using a 1/4 inch, sew your 4 patches together. With our 4 patch units, and just so that you get some practice, I'm once again going to spin the seams to make them as flat as possible. As you can see here, pick out the stitches that are on the outside of the seam allowance, twist, finger press down, and then press. Now it's time to lay out the block and sew it together. Pay careful attention to the pattern when laying out this block. I made a mistake once or twice and had a date with Jack. Save yourself the trouble and pay close attention to how it's laid out. You will see here that when it is laid out properly, the black sew-on flips point in the same direction on either side, and that is to the lower left and the upper right, and your 4 patch units start with a medium square in the top left hand corner. Flip the right hand squares onto the left hand squares and take them over to the sewing machine and sew this seam at a 1/4 inch. Repeat with the other 2 squares, noticing here that there's not really a seam to nest or match up, but just pay careful attention when sewing over the seams so that they don't get upturned. Back over at the design board, lay it back out again to ensure you still have the correct orientation, noting that I pressed both towards the 4 patch. Nest this seam and sew the final seam of your block at a 1/4 inch. And here we are, the finished product. And here we are, my 2 finished blocks, the monochrome selection and the other triadic colour scheme that I'm completing in purple, green and orange. Thank you once again for joining me this week for summer camp. Join me again next Wednesday for week 4. I'll see you then.